In this video, I want to talk about what I learned about wearing a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, to monitor my blood sugars over the last few months. Why, first of all, did I want to wear something like this? The answer was because I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and as an autoimmune disease that has a hormonal component, and pretty much anybody with autoimmune disease in general, we tend to have a lot of hormonal imbalances and a propensity towards having blood sugar issues and dysglycemia, which is where we cannot tolerate carbs very well. Yay for us with autoimmune disease, right? Unfortunately, if we do not address this blood sugar stuff, then we can never feel our best, especially long term with our autoimmune disease. And our symptoms and just all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes in our body can continue to go on. And so it's really important for us to get our blood sugars in check. If you haven't watched the last two videos in this blood sugar series, I recommend you go ahead and do that just to kind of learn the background of why it's so bad for us. But in this video, I want to talk about my own experience. And first of all, I started wearing this CGM because my son Nathan has type 1 diabetes. And when he first got diagnosed, we were doing the finger prick method with a glucose monitor. And while that was great, we were just testing him before meals and then 2 hours after just to see where he was and if we need to adjust his insulin. Once we got him onto a CGM though, it was like the world opened up to us because we were able to see all of the different things that were happening in between those pricks. And seeing that, I was like, oh, I really wonder what's happening with me, because I knew at this point I had some issues. I definitely was feeling some symptoms after eating especially high carb meals, and I've always had, especially about 5 years prior to getting diagnosed with my hypothyroidism, have had hypoglycemia or low blood sugar issues, being hangry. My husband always used to say, just go eat something, and things like that. So I know I've always had some metabolic kind of things going on. And recently I kind of suspected that I definitely have some sort of insulin resistance going on a little bit, at least. And just, I feel like some of my flares from my Hashimoto's have been a result of my blood sugars just not being stable. And I started trying to do this via finger pricks with the glucose meter, but I really love this story that I read in one of these books, and I can't remember who said it, but it's kind of like Tony Soprano from The Sopranos, right? If you look at him, one point in time, he's a great guy. He's hanging out with his family, and he's hanging out with his coworkers, and they're laughing and they're having a great time. And another time, he's hanging out in the backyard and he's throwing a football for his kids. Looks like a great guy, right? But then when you start looking at all the things, and you start noticing that maybe not such a great guy, right? So that's kind of what a CGM does. And I really wanted to kind of get the full picture and not spend hours and hours and hours a day pricking my finger. I started using the CGM through a program called Levels Health. And this is not a sponsored video by any means. I have no association with them whatsoever. I really just wanted to explain what I have found as a result of wearing this. I figured I would wear it for a month and just kind of get an insight on what was happening to me. And then I wound up actually wearing it for several months, and I still have it on because I really have found it to be one of the most useful tools for me. And it's really helping me to balance out my blood sugars. Now, before I get into everything, I do want to state that what works for me may not work for you, and maybe the complete opposite. We are all individuals, and so if white rice, for example, makes my blood sugar rise to sky-high levels, it may not do anything to you. So take what I'm saying in this video more like, hey, that's her experience, and I wonder if that could happen to me kind of thing, rather than, oh, white rice raises her blood sugar, so therefore I should not have white rice. Don't look at it that way. Just look at it more as a way to stoke your curiosity. First, I want to give you my 3 biggest takeaways, and then I'll get into more of the details about everything. So takeaway number 1 was I really learned from wearing the CGM that the sugar cravings I was having after meals were actually from high blood sugars, or from when I was going up on the upswing, rather than me coming down and having a low blood sugar. This was news to me because I had always thought it was a low blood sugar. I never realized that I had high blood sugars. It never even occurred to me that that would have been a thing. I always thought I had low ones. And so I learned not only what they feel like, the difference between the low and the high, but I also learned that when it is a high blood sugar, not to give into that sugar craving, because it's kind of persistent and throwing a tantrum, but I was just shoving more food into my mouth. And that was like the worst thing I could have done because I was already not tolerating the carbs. The last thing I needed was even more carbs. And I also realized that high blood sugar after like a lunch, for example, really correlated with my mid-afternoon tiredness. I always thought it was like an adrenal fatigue thing, but if I did not eat a higher carb meal, I did not have it. My takeaway number 2 was that there were certain meals that were really causing me issues, like breakfast, for example. I had no idea that my breakfast was so bad for me because I thought I was eating a pretty normal breakfast, but it was setting me up for a day on the blood sugar roller coaster and just, it was just so bad for me. And I'll get into more detail on that in a minute. And then the third takeaway I learned was that my blood sugar levels were kind of like a barometer of stress. And I'm talking about all kinds of stress, whether this is like lack of sleep, too much or too high intensity of exercise, actual stress, just all of this kind of stuff. If I had too much of it going on in my body and too frequent or too long lasting, my blood sugar would go up and kind of stay up, and it wouldn't really come back down into normal levels or into a level that I really wanted. So it was really interesting that it wasn't just food, but it was also stress. And the more stress I had, the higher my blood sugars would go. Okay, so how does the CGM work? You wear this small device on your arm or your abdomen typically, and it lasts for about 10 to 14 days, and it's a little small whisker that goes into your skin and just attaches to your skin, and it actually reads the interstitial fluid, the glucose within that, rather than your blood sugar. But it has been found to be extremely accurate and just as good as doing a finger prick. The difference between finger pricks and the CGM though is that the CGM measures your blood sugar every 5 minutes, which then you can get the whole entire picture of what's happening to you day and night. So the CGM I'm using is through Levels, and the data from the Libre is automatically updated into the Levels app. And then from there you can get a lot of information about what's going on with you. They actually rate your meals from 1 to 10, 1 being it really raised your blood sugar high and for a long period of time. So that's really not a really good meal for you because it's keeping you in that high blood sugar range and probably spiking your cortisol. 10 on the other hand is one where it really didn't do very much to your blood sugar at all. It's just kind of very steady, maybe a nominal little bit of rise, but it wasn't anything that you have to be worried about. So that meal probably was a good one to continue to eat in the future. I do love this visual for seeing what certain meals do to me, and I do kind of like the gamification aspect of it. I don't want to get too involved in it and just throw blood sugar out to everything else. And this is a point that I really want to bring up like in my video next week, but you do have to kind of pay attention to other things as well. So you may find a meal does not affect your blood sugar at all, but it might be something that you don't tolerate from an autoimmune disease standpoint, and it's going to also cause you to have autoimmune activity. It's still not going to be a good meal for you. You still need to balance all of this kind of stuff out. And then on the other hand, if there is something that is so super nutrient dense, but may raise your blood sugar a little while, that may be worth the trade-off. So it can't just be about blood sugar. So that's why I don't necessarily want to get fully into the gamification aspect of it, but it is really handy to be able to see where you are ranking. And I thought this was really, really helpful. Like they gave you a daily report, a weekly report, and a monthly report. And seeing the trends, like say in that monthly report, was really helpful to know that, oh, all of these meals were really, really bad. And that's how I actually discovered that breakfasts were so bad for me, because I got a monthly report and every single one that was like a 1 or a 2 was a breakfast. I had been drinking a small glass of orange juice every morning because I had a probiotic that was powdered and it tasted like terrible in water. So I was just drinking orange juice to make it palatable. And I think that was the big thing, because once I took that out, I experimented and I was like coming up to like a 7 or 8 instead of a 1, 2, or 3 for every single meal. So that was really good. And then I had also, we have pancakes a lot, like paleo pancakes, just because it's easy. We can make a huge batch on the weekends, freeze them, and then just take them out, get out in the morning, right? So that's just what we do. But I had been having maple syrup on them because, you know, what do you have? Is it pancakes without maple syrup, right? So I took that out and I started replacing that with like a nut butter or a berry syrup or coconut whipped cream, and my scores went up to like 9 or 10. So it was just the little adjustments, but it was really, really helpful to see that, hey, every breakfast was terrible, and I was able to make the adjustments and make breakfast not a terrible meal for me blood sugar wise to get me on that blood sugar roller coaster all day long. Levels also brings in workout data. So say you were to have a meal like breakfast and then go to a walk within 2 hours of that meal, it will actually put those together and give you a score for both of them. And this was actually helpful because then I could find out if I had this particular meal but stayed sedentary, just sat, what was the score versus if I did a walk after. My blood sugar level did not get nearly as high when I was walking. And so I kind of from that took that if I'm going to have a high carb meal or something really sugary or something, for whatever reason, if I do a walk or a workout afterwards, it definitely blunts the spike. I actually the first month ate whatever I wanted. I went back to eating gluten-free baked goods and pastas and just whatever because I wanted to see what happened to my blood sugar. And yeah, not good things. And it wasn't even necessarily like burgers and fries. It was like a bowl of white rice or a bowl of cassava flour pasta or a handful of siete tortilla chips. None of these things were treating me very well, and my blood sugar would go like super, super high, way out of the normal ranges. But from there, I started to make little changes just to see what would happen. So I still wanted to try eating these higher carb foods because I just wanted to know. And so instead of having white rice, for example, I switched to brown rice to see if there was a difference. There wasn't. And then I tried limiting the amount of rice, and that made a big difference. There used to be a time when I'd have as much rice as I wanted with a meal, and then I tried a cup and it was still not great, but now like a half cup with my meals doesn't seem to raise my blood sugar that much. And so if I do want to have rice with a meal, I can do that. I do tend to have cauliflower rice more often, but you could be out or just convenience factor or whatever it is. I found that a half cup of rice is like a good happy medium for me. Then I played around with eating protein, fat, fiber, and everything with carbs to see how much it would slow down versus not having those in a meal. And like conventional knowledge, yes, it did actually help blunt the sugar spike. However, it still did matter what kind of carbs I had. So like if I had some chicken, broccoli, and a bowl of cassava flour pasta with some olive oil, my blood sugar would still spike. However, if I had some chicken and broccoli and some roasted sweet potatoes, it wouldn't spike so much. So there was definitely a difference in the like quality of carbs, whether or not they were really fast burning and processed and that kind of thing. And I also played around with high fiber carbs because a lot of people always say, oh, high fiber carbs are not going to affect your blood sugar. Well, they kind of did with me. They were kind of mixed. So some things like garbanzo beans, chickpeas, didn't do very much for me. However, any grains whatsoever, didn't matter what they were, how they were prepared or anything, they always raised my blood sugar. And some of the other beans, even other than the garbanzo beans, still raise my blood sugar as well. Lentils raise my blood sugar. And so like I said, this is highly individual. So you may not experience that, but that's me. And it just really kind of, I think, shows that I do have some inability to tolerate carbs, but you may as well. So it's something really important to note. Another thing I played around was with the time of day of eating something. I've learned from Nathan's diabetes stuff that there is a certain amount of like insulin resistance with him in the evening. And so I wondered if this was the same thing for me. So for example, I would have white rice in the evening for dinner and then have the exact same thing for lunch the next day. And it would do totally different things to my blood sugar. One, it was like in the evening, it would spike like crazy. In the afternoon, it would not spike at all or just spike slightly. Now, in the evening, I don't tend to be moving around very much. I am kind of sedentary on the couch or just sitting around talking to my family. Whereas in the afternoon, I do tend to get up and move around. I'm just doing stuff. So there is that. However, I did do this often with several different meals, and it really kind of seemed to be a trend that in the evening, I could not tolerate carbs as much as I could in the afternoon. This also changed the timing of when we have desserts, because we had been having desserts, if we ever had them, in the evening after dinner. I think that's a traditional time to have them. But after many nights of me not being able to sleep because Nathan was super high and because of my own high blood sugars, we decided to switch that to like in the afternoon, either like after lunch or mid-afternoon, and that seems to work so much better for us. Sometimes we'll have a piece of dark chocolate after dinner, and that doesn't really do very much for us. But I'm talking about like having a brownie or a cupcake or any of these other kind of desserts. Another thing I played around with is movement or exercise. And as I mentioned before, the walking definitely helped me to blunt any blood sugar spikes. However, I did play around with doing like high intensity exercise, and that made my blood sugar rise all by itself. It didn't matter if I hadn't had food for several hours. If I did any high intensity exercise, my blood sugar would rise. Same thing if I did too much, it would do the same thing. Now this speaks to cortisol being released in my body because it's too much exercise, too high intensity of exercise is a stressor on our body. And I've known this because I don't have the best exercise tolerance ever since I've gotten my autoimmune disease. I mean, I used to be an Ironman triathlete, right? Used to do so much. And now I can't do these things and I feel it. I am dead for days if I do. And so it was interesting to see the blood sugar correlation with that as well. And that's why I say it definitely seemed like my blood sugar was somewhat of a barometer of stress on my body. Another thing I tried was playing around with the amount of carbs that I would have every day just to see what would happen. I tried keto for about 2 weeks, and it really, like every time I've tried keto before, and again this time, it amps me up so much that I can't sleep at night. And I'm already not sleeping very well because of the diabetes alarms that go off all night for Nathan. So the last thing I needed was less sleep. So I didn't want to stay with that. Plus I don't necessarily like, keto is not the answer for everybody. And I think it stresses my body out too much. My blood sugars were a little bit higher in general while I was doing keto, which is the exact opposite of what you would expect. But I think it was, again, I think stress. Also like stress of the restriction of the diet, but also stress on my body. So my blood sugars were not, it wasn't that they were out of range, but they were just a little bit higher than usual. So instead I tried working with a lower carb diet where I tried to keep my carbs under like 130 to 150 grams per day. And this is not necessarily a low carb, it's lower, I call it lower. I think like a standard American diet, somewhere between 250 and 400 a day, I think. So this is definitely low compared to a standard American diet, but it still allows for a lot of different things like sweet potatoes and squash and fruit and all of that kind of stuff in there. And I do think that this is my sweet spot. After having experimented for several months now, if I stay in this range, I definitely seem to have better overall blood glucose, like average, but also less of the spikes up or down. And so I think that's where I'm gonna stay. And it's not necessarily that I avoid cupcakes, for example, or anything that's going to spike my blood sugar really high. I just really try to make that a special occasion now. It's one of those things where I know it's going to do that to me, so I plan it out. I make sure I'm not doing high intensity exercise that day, or that I'm doing something else that's gonna raise my blood sugar or eating something else. So it's kind of like a balance. I don't wanna go so far that I don't live my life, right? But at the same time, I have to make sure that I'm not going to have constant spikes up and down all day, because I think that's where it was getting me into trouble prior to this. And I really think it's been helping my health overall in general, because I definitely feel so much better, like so much more energized all day long without any of those peaks and valleys. Yeah, I'm not getting the sleep I need. So I think once we can finally get that all figured out, I'm gonna feel really, really good. But it's definitely been an eye-opener, because like AIP diet has definitely helped me with the autoimmune disease and all that inflammation and all that feeling, but I definitely still had some energy dips and things throughout the day, even when I was feeling great from my Hashimoto's. So I really think that's what it was. Also, I'm not having the flares like I was, like even little ones. And I think they were a result of me eating so much sugar and carbs all the time. And I actually just had my thyroid labs run, and I was shocked to find out that I was completely normal, in the normal range, no antibodies, anything like that, even though I haven't had all of the sleep that I've been needing. And I really think it's because my blood sugar levels have been really, really stable. I also learned that if I ate a lot of carbs over a several day period, like I did all like in the beginning, but then I tried a few other times, my blood sugar would kind of the base level would rise. And so I wouldn't come back down to like the 70s and the 80s. I would stay in the 90s or the hundreds the entire time. So it definitely seemed to have a cumulative effect. The more carbs I ate, the more I would stay in that state, like place. But the less carbs I ate, and on my lower carb diet, I'm staying in the 70 or 80 range now. So these are the things that I've noticed. Again, this may not be the same for you. You may try a cup of or half cup of white rice and go sky high, or you may not have any effect at all. You might have 400 grams of sugar every day for like 3 months and never see a blood sugar spike. Everything is so highly individual. So that's why I really recommend that you try this out for yourself, not necessarily the CGM part. It would be great if you would like to do that, but just trying to find out what your blood sugar does for certain meals, because it is so eye-opening and it can really help you to get into a more stable state with both your blood sugar and your autoimmune disease, so you're not constantly in that cortisol, inflammation, immune system ramp up cycle that I talked about in the first video. And I just really hope this can help you to understand that, hey, like maybe this is something that I really have to pay attention to when I do eat. I keep going back to white rice just because it's what's on my mind, but if I do have white rice and I feel shaky and tired afterwards, maybe I should check my blood sugar, because that happened to her. She found out that it raised her blood sugar, so maybe I should find that out too. And if you're not using a CGM to do this, remember to prick your finger at least before the meal and 1 and 2 hours afterwards, and if you feel any symptoms. But as I said in the last video, I sometimes feel the symptoms about a half hour before my blood sugar goes high. So if I was to finger prick or look on the CGM to see the reading, it would actually say I'm normal, but then I would check again a half hour later and then it would be high. So just do keep that in mind if you are using finger prick method instead. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful, just the insights that I've learned over the last few months. And it's just one of those things, the delicate balance of autoimmune disease, but it could be one of those big pieces to the puzzle that will help you to lasting health. And then in my video next week, it's going to be about how to balance your blood sugar so that you can do these things to really kind of help make sure your blood sugar is a lot more level and not doing these big spikes and lows, so that you can have lasting autoimmune health. See you then.